Welcome to the Rex Andrews Show. If you're a first-time listener, welcome to the show. Glad to have you. If you're a returning listener, thank you. And I want to say thank you because of one thing. We recently found out that the show has cracked the top 10% of fastest growing podcasts in the world. And that's pretty exciting. And it's all because of you and the great guests that we have on. So thank you. A little bit of house cleaning before we get started here today. Please remember to subscribe no matter where you're listening in. And if you're not on your favorite podcast distribution point, you can get us just about everywhere. I think we're at 23 different podcast libraries or distribution points now, so you can find us anywhere. You can always find us on social media, the major ones for the short time. And then always on the show website at rexandrewshow.com. So visit us there. You can listen to the podcast there, and you can also check out the other cool things we're up to as we grow the show. All right, so we got the stuff out of the way, the house cleaning. Got a great guest for you today, and I'm always on the outlook for interesting people, interesting stories, interesting perspectives. The challenge we have in our world today is we get a lot of sound bites here and there, things that are happening, and we don't really get the full story. We don't get to see the people behind the headlines, the people behind the work, the people behind the things that make the world go round. So today, I have a special guest for us. He is a sheriff's deputy in a Northern California jurisdiction. We don't ever name those. And he has been in law enforcement for quite some time, a foster parent, and a podcaster. And so I want to introduce to you today, Brent Hardy. Brent, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here. And hey, congratulations on having one of the fastest growing podcasts out there. That's hard to do.
It's a lot of work. People think, you just show up and sit behind a mic and yap and it all happens. Well, if it was only that easy, right?
Yeah, I mean, my OnlyFans was growing pretty fast, but my wife put a stop to that. So I had to change my tune.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, it's a lot of work, but and there's a lot of podcasts. There's so many choices out there. So I'm always so grateful. And it's really about good guests and then the people who listen in. There's over 1 million podcasts in the iTunes store these days. So there's a lot of choices for things for people to listen to. So
Yep.
I have a mentor because back in the days when I ran my radio program, he always used to say, well, Rex, there's an audience for dogs barking if you market it correctly. So this just might be dogs barking. Not sure. All right. So let's fast forward it up and let's get this program going today. What I wanted to always do with my shows, if anybody's listened to them or if you have, I always want to talk about the story behind people and what they do. Life is a cumulative of steps that we take, hopping from one rock to the next rock, crossing that stream of life. And sometimes we get wet, sometimes we have to hop backwards, but we always continue to hop forward, and we are always a cumulative total of those hops. And so, Brent, I know you're in law enforcement. We're going to talk a lot about what that's like these days in this crazy world that we live in. It's upside down in many ways. I think anybody with a brain cell that fires can see that. But tell us a little bit of the backstory here. Where'd you grow up? What was your family like? Siblings, parents? What was the environment that helped shape Brent?
Wow. Well, I'm still working on my autobiography.
Aren't we all?
So I grew up in a small town in Northern California called Winters. And Winters is actually, it's where I'm at right now. I had to come to visit with my buddy. But Winters is a small town that lies in between the Sacramento area and the San Francisco Bay Area. It's not too far from UC Davis. Davis is the next town over.
Okay.
And it was just that small town environment, right? That Friday night lights, the football games. Growing up here was just awesome. Just that small town stuff going on. And one thing I found out when I was here was I really liked helping people. My parents were involved in a church, and my dad was just that go-to guy where if somebody needed help, he would be the guy to go to help them build something. Like there was an old lady who was having a hard time going up the stairs on her porch, and I remember going with him as a teenager to go build her a ramp, and rip out her old porch, But he always did that kind of stuff. Just helping people was always a part of my growing up in service to people. And right after high school, I got involved in a missionary program. I ended up traveling abroad for a while. I came back and I started working in my own hometown. I worked at the auto parts store. And the thing that really messed with me is the redundancy of the job. You'd come in, you'd punch in on the clock, you'd deal with the same customers every day, you'd do the same stuff, and I just hated it. And it wasn't that the job was hard. I hated that there was no challenge, and it was pretty much the same thing every day. So I was talking to a friend of mine, and he worked in law enforcement, and he said, I wouldn't encourage anybody to get into law enforcement. It's not for everybody. But if you really want something that's just different every day with different challenges, that's a good career to look into.
Okay.
So I was taking
So I'm gonna unpack you there just a little bit back. Okay. So you grew up in a family that was pretty focused in their church, a lot service oriented. Now, did you have any siblings growing up?
Yeah, I got 3 older siblings.
Okay.
So I was the youngest and most irritating.
Well, maybe they'll agree with that. Maybe not. Maybe your parents would agree with that. Okay. What was your home life growing up? Were you guys pretty close together? Were you siblings that wrestled and, mom kicked out of the house for wrestling? And, what was it like growing up?
Oh, we were fighters. So my sister's the oldest, and she basically enjoyed beating up her 3 little brothers so much, she actually became a correctional officer.
Oh, you're kidding.
And so no, not at all. And she's only like 5'2", 110, 115 pounds, and she could fight with the best of them.
Okay.
I always said that if her and I got in a real fight, it would be the most epic battle in world history, because I'm too prideful to lose to a girl, and she's too prideful to lose to her little brother.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah. So, she enjoyed beating up her little brother so much, she found a career where she can do it for a living. And I had another brother who, it's funny about him because he actually ended up becoming a firefighter and paramedic, but he's older than me by about 3 or 4 years. And he was the brother that did everything right. Okay. He had the straight A's in high school, went to college, straight A's in college, had his life all mapped out. But when he graduated college, he just could not find a job. Like, he just struggled.
Right.
And then he got married, started a family, and still struggling to find work. And then here I was, just got back from living abroad, and then I started working at the auto parts store, started working construction a little bit, ended up buying my first house, then getting into law enforcement, all this stuff. And I'm looking at him like, wow, he must really hate his little brother, because on paper, I looked like I was so much more successful than he was. And then my other brother, well, he works construction. He does good. Good. I don't really have a whole lot to say about him.
Well, we're not here to beat up our siblings. I'm just trying to understand what your environment was like. So,
and then
go ahead.
And then my dad, this is another side of this, it's pretty much a family of civil service. My dad was the Marine engineer for the San Francisco fireboat.
Oh, wow.
And this is the man who actually pretty much saved the city during the 89 earthquake. I'm not exaggerating that, because when the earthquake hit, all the water mains got broken out. Yep. And so when a fire broke out in the Marina district, the firefighters didn't have water to fight the fire. And so his job, being on the fireboat, was they set up portable fire hydrants. And so he would pump the water from the bay into the hydrants so the firefighters can put out the fire. And he basically saved the city from burning down like it did in the earthquake of 1910 or 19, whenever, when San Francisco burned down.
That's crazy.
And so that's the legacy I'm trying to live up to. The guy who would jokingly raise his index finger and said, "This is it. This is the finger that saved the city," because that's the one he started the pumps with. Yeah, and he retired a few years ago. But yeah, he had a great career down there, basically rescuing people out of the water, putting out fires, recovering bodies from the Bay Area and stuff. And and then my sister got in the civil service. My brother now is also a San Francisco firefighter, following in his footsteps, and I also work in civil service.
Well, yeah, so it sounds like civil service was just something your family does, huh?
Yeah, it was definitely a lesson growing up. My dad, he did construction for a while, and he had the ups and downs and the paychecks that were there, and then they weren't. And so he saw civil service as a blessing, because it was something that was a consistent paycheck.
Sure.
Absolutely. And knowing now, but at the time, well, now I look at it and say he wasn't always the greatest with finances, but at the time he would teach us that, it's okay to go in a little bit of a debt here or a little bit of debt there, because you have that constant paycheck coming in.
Yeah.
But understanding more about his life and the dynamics of money and then no money, I understand why he thought that. He really saw that consistency in pay as just a huge blessing to him.
Yeah. So you mentioned real quick that you spent a little time abroad doing some missionary work. Where did you go serve on a mission or missionary work?
I was actually in Brazil.
Oh, wow. What part?
I went down there. I was in the southern part of Brazil, Florianopolis area. the state of Santa Catarina. I actually learned how to speak Portuguese, and then I was actually teaching English classes and helping people out down there.
Nice.
Yeah, that's one thing you learn if you ever live abroad is people who learn how to speak English are the ones that really have a good life for themselves.
Yes.
You know, they don't necessarily have to have the good education or anything like that, but if you can speak English, you are golden to any company that does international business, any banking, anybody in the tourist industry. I mean, you could really make a good middle class, upper middle class, or even rich lifestyle if you can speak English. So I went down there and taught free English classes to basically people of a third world country and kind of help them develop their English, because you're not going to get that. You're not going to get an actual American to come down and teach you English, you know?
No. I had a niece that did some missionary work down in Sao Paulo. So she was down there for about 18 months and really enjoyed it. But she said when she got back to the States, she was happy not to eat any more rice and beans for a while.
Yes. And the funny thing about that, though, is they have no spice.
Yes, very bland.
I
very,
came back,
very bland.
yeah, very bland food. And so I came back and I was very happy to just have Mexican food. People were like, well, why do you want Mexican food? I'm like, that's the one thing I didn't have in Brazil. Like, there was no spice, there was no flavor to their stuff. And they had great food. Don't get me wrong. I'm not bashing what they had. But yeah, after 2 years of eating, rice and beans was a main staple. Didn't matter what you had. You could have had a pizza, but you'd have rice and beans with it. You know, it's very much a main staple down there.
That's great. Well, that's good. So you got back, you started working at the auto parts store, you started going off some training. Then what took place?
Yeah. And so that's when I was talking to my friend who was like, well, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And I explained that, you know, I don't know, but this is what I hate, you know. And I was going to junior college and they started doing those career tests, you know, those apathy tests where you see what you're more prone to. And I just knew I really just hated repetitiveness. I wanted something different every day. And he said, well, I wouldn't encourage it, but go into law enforcement. So I signed up for what they call a Citizens Police Academy with the local police agency, and where basically they just do a presentation every Wednesday night, and you go and they kind of teach you about their work and what they do, and they have different bureaus come through, and you know, you have your investigators come through, your canine guy will come through and do, you know, and it was just really neat to kind of rub elbows and actually get to sit down and talk with police officers and learn about their job. And so I ended up going into construction for a little bit, and that was up and down. This would have been back in 2008. Construction just wasn't doing great, and I was tired of, again, going back to the consistency and pay. I was tired of working really hard only to get laid off or for the job to end and not find more work. And so I was looking at getting laid off, and they said, well, it might be 9 months to a year before you have work again. And it takes 6 months to go through a police academy. Yeah. So I used my unemployment benefits and, you know, to help pay the bills. And I put myself full time through the police academy. And I just took that leap. You know, and it was a hardship at the time, but it really ended up becoming a huge blessing later on. And so I actually applied for this agency that I still work for. And it takes so long to go through the background checks and the interviews. Integrity is a huge thing. I mean, they have background guys that will come and talk to your neighbors, talk to your bosses. You know, they want good people there, and they want to have good candidates. And so it took about 6 months to go through the academy, and I graduated on Saturday, and Monday morning they offered me a job.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, it was a huge blessing. I was the only guy. Again, the economy wasn't great. This would have been 2010. And I was the only guy in my academy that got hired right away. Everyone else was still waiting, and most of those guys never ended up working in police work at all.
Wow. So growing up in winter, what was the political climate there? What was kind of the general of the town? I know every town's got some, you know, left and right and down the middle, but what was it? If you're going to say it leaned in one direction more or the other, what would that been at that time?
I think winters was a reflection of a general issue we have in California. You have the areas that are just very far left, very almost whack jobs. You know, like Berkeley is one of these cities that just it's almost hard to spend time there. Winters was a more farming community. Okay. You know, a lot of orchards, walnuts and almonds are big, huge crops around here, multi-million-dollar crops. And so it was a great, very diverse town. It was about 60 or 70% was Hispanic. So you grew up, you knew Spanish, or at least you spoke a lot of it, or at least spoke enough to order the good food. But growing up there, it was a great small town. Everybody knew everybody. If you ditched high school, you actually had to go to the next town over, because if you stayed in town, somebody was going to call the principal directly and say, hey, we got a couple of your students over here at the pizza factory. I'm like, oh no. So but it was fun. I remember it was just that small town America feel
Okay.
in the heart of California, and it was just everything stereotypical that you would imagine with that small town feel was there.
Okay, good. Well, it helps us understand what shaped your perspectives. You've got family in the service. It's public service. You fireman, correctional service officer, fire, captain, boat captain, and now you step into the deputy sheriff. Where did you start? Well, in what general area? Did you stay in the general area there in Northern California then, where you went to work?
Yeah, so I'm a deputy sheriff for a county that's, I mean, I can't
Yeah.
speak for my county, right? I can't speak
Yep.
for my agency. I will tell you it's not too far from Sacramento or San Francisco.
Good enough.
Yeah, so it's somewhere in between there. We see a little bit of everything in this county. I got a job there and I just liked it. And that's not true for every cop. That's a hard thing sometimes. Sometimes you get a job with a police agency and you don't mesh, you don't get along with the culture there. You struggle for one way or another, and but I've always done well here. I've always appreciated the people I work with. I've always had a lot of fun, and that's the hard thing. I mean, with all the stress and things that we see and do, and I've seen and done a lot, have guys that just help you make it fun and can help you kind of laugh about things and laugh it off. And
Sure.
I watched my partner one time get chased down by a bull that we were trying to corral back into a house. And at the moment, it was a pretty freaky incident. And he was pretty startled when he's running up on this porch and running into his living room of the stranger's house, just trying to get away from this cow. And then he tells it like we just laugh about it, and we were laughing about it at the moment it happened, but that's important. I think it's important to any high stress job or environment to just learn how to smile and laugh at, your own trials and some of the things you see and do.
Well, my father was a career highway patrolman here in Colorado. And so we had a pretty good glimpse of law enforcement in my family. Did you have to work a lot of variant shifts, or did you work in a department that you pretty much didn't have to like bid for your shifts? What would your work life look like when you first started compared to today?
Yeah, that's the beauty about working for a county as opposed to a city or state is the county here, especially here in California, they have certain obligations they have to do. And as a result, you have lots of different jobs within a county as a deputy sheriff. You can do prisoner transport. You can work as a bailiff. Okay, bailiffing is Monday through Friday, 8 to 4, all weekends and holidays off.
Oh my goodness, that's a banker's job.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're going to school at night or you have kids with sports schedules and stuff like that, I mean, those guys will go and work as a bailiff. You're getting paid the same. You sit in a courtroom. Every once in a while, you might have to yell at somebody, but you have normal hours, and then you have your patrol shifts, right? And I loved working patrol. You work these 12-hour shifts and then you'd be off for 12 hours and back on. You'd work like 3 days a week and then be off for 4 days. And then you'd work 4 days a week and be back on for 3 days.
Yep.
And so that was great. You could do prisoner transport, which takes you all over the state, just picking up and dropping guys off. We had a Marine unit, where these guys will go out and sea dues and they would go out in the bay and do stuff out there. And then then we have the investigative unit. You have your narcotics cops, you have your general investigations. I've actually got pulled into the investigative units and I work with the coroner's office now.
Oh.
So I got pulled in last year. So I actually investigate deaths and I actually investigate coronavirus deaths, and I have to count those for the state or for our county and stuff. And I do a lot of that work now. And I clean up after serious crime scenes. I clean up after, we always hear stories about maybe the person that died in their home and wasn't found for a month or two. Like I'm the guy you call to come deal with that, So that's been very interesting. And it's funny because I've had people tell me, you must be experiencing a lot of trauma. You must be seeing all these things, whether it's a dead child or something like that. You should maybe get therapy, get some help. Well, the truth is, I don't experience that trauma. I just clean up after it.
Yeah.
I clean up after somebody else's trauma. I'm not walking into a room and finding my loved one dead. It's somebody else who has to deal with that. But that doesn't mean it doesn't take a toll on me in one degree or another. I'm sure one day I'm going to have to answer for that, or it might make itself manifest at some point.
Well, you're very blessed that you are not just on a lot of like city police departments. I've got a niece that's on a city police department over in Utah, and of course, won't name her jurisdiction, but it's a small department, and boy, she's got a regular schedule, and probably I just saw her a couple weeks back, and she said about 70% of her calls are just domestic issues, fights
Yeah,
and issues and stuff like that. So that's not a various different type of job, but it looks like within the county there as a sheriff's department, you can actually work in different areas and have different experiences as a law enforcement officer.
yeah, it's nice. I worked grave shift patrol for 2 years, and I worked in some tough towns and some tough neighborhoods and really got my experience as a cop. And then they said, oh, it's your turn to be a bailiff. And so then I went from night shift to, scruffy beard to, unkept hair and everything. Next thing you know, I had to have the polished boots, the pressed uniform, you know, your golden badge, all the stuff. And I had to go and work, 8 to 4 and have a normal schedule. And I hated it, actually. I actually hated having a normal schedule. I felt like I couldn't do anything with my life. But that's the beauty about it, though, is when I am much older, 45, 50, 60, whatever it is, if I'm still working as a cop, I don't have to go on the street and fight 20-year-olds anymore.
Right.
I can go be in a bailiff and go sit there and just listen to a judge and yawn, or I can go do prisoner transport and I'm just driving a van up and down the state.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I can remember my dad being a highway patrolman. He worked all kinds of crazy shifts, and it was never the consistent lifestyle that you would really want as a kid or as a family, because one week he'd be on swing, the next he'd be on graveyard, the next thing he'd days. And so it was just this hit or miss experience with my father. Now I don't regret any of it. The only I always tell this little story. The only regret I had is my dad sort of did the scared straight method with us for DUIs. And so he would come and get us kids from the house and take us out middle of the night, middle of the day, wherever. If we were available, we were on scene, and he would take us to the investigative scenes where they were covering a fatal, and he'd take us up and take us to the body and pull the sheet back and kind of stuff. So we got scared straight, no kidding. And the worst one that we ever experienced, there was a guy who he was a beer taster for Coors, and he had been doing his work before he went to work. And he lost control of his car because he was drunk and slid it on ice. The car went through the guardrail. The guardrail went through him and back out the other side, and was basically hanging by the guardrail, the whole car and him. So my dad came and got us and showed us that scene. And I can remember throwing up as much as I've ever thrown up in my life, because I was so sick from that. But, if someone had done that today, that would be child abuse and those types of things. But I'll tell you what, I never drove drunk ever. So anyway, but no, I have a taste of understanding what it's like. He was a career highway patrolman. So bless his heart, he did an amazing amount of service for people. And I think that's the side that people don't understand, is the amount of service that law enforcement officers get to do in your career.
Yeah, that's the side. I had a captain come to one of our we call it a briefing, right before we actually go start our shift. We all get together, the supervisor comes along and he says, this is what happened last night, or this is what happened yesterday, and blah, blah, blah. We need to go do extra patrol here. Well, he came and he was kind of talking about something, but I remember he said this, and I'll never forget. He said, if you got into this job, what did he say? He said something about, I'll never forget it. Now I'm misquoting it. He just said, if you did not get into this job to help people, then go find another job.
Yeah.
Because when all is said and done, when you water it all down, that's really what we try and do. I can't tell you how many times I pulled over on the freeway to help a young mom change her tire, or gave somebody a ride to go get gas, or even like a domestic dispute. They can be dangerous, they can be serious, but I like to think that I'm giving that victim a chance to get out of a bad relationship when I'm taking their loved one to the jail, or getting a what they call a emergency protective order to make sure that loved one, even if he gets out of jail or bails out, that he can't contact her for another 5 or 6 days, so she can get her affairs in order and get out of that relationship.
Yeah.
But that's really the perspective we always try and take. Same thing with, if I arrest somebody for DUI, I might be ruining his life. I might be ruining his career, but I might be saving his life as well. And I might be saving somebody's life down the road.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't really get into politics on the show. We just talk about people's lives and their stories and why they do things and how it's impacted them. But one thing I do want to touch on today, just because it's been such a pervasive issue over the last few years, and people like to think that it was just during the BLM riots and marches and the whole defund the police movement. But, you can skate this back before that, before during the Obama administration where, officers were shot down in Dallas and, just things were done terribly. And so there's been a movement, and I wish my dad was here to talk to him about this. And that's why I was anxious to get you on the show. Is there's been a movement that have been anti-police, and there's been a movement that have been making police into the bad guys, and only clips of stories being displayed, and yet people jump to huge conclusions. What's that been like for you, being in law enforcement over the last few years, when there's been this accelerated erosion of respect and perception of the police?
When we talk about trauma and the things that we experience, that's the part that's probably been the hardest on me mentally, spiritually, emotionally. It's when you get on Facebook and you see people tearing up cops, people who you thought were friends or even family, getting on here and talking about how much they hate cops or talking about bad cops or something like that. But they do it in an overgeneralization that frankly could put my life in danger. And it's happened. I actually live an hour away from where I work now. It takes me an hour to get to work because one day I actually used to live 15 minutes from work. But one day I was working as a school resource officer, and they tracked down where I lived, and I was at work, and they ended up showing up my house and assaulting my wife on my doorstep. Basically to send me a message was their ultimate goal. And my wife was able to kind of scramble away. She kicked them, scrambled away, shut the door, locked it, ran upstairs, barricaded herself in the bathroom, and then realized she didn't have her phone. So by the time she had enough courage to come out and call me, about 45 minutes had gone by. And so I rushed over there and got to her, and she was pretty traumatized by it. It took her a while to convince her to call the local police officers to come and investigate the situation. It ended up going unsolved. But the very next day, I packed up my whole family and moved out to my parents' place because they had a ranch outside of town, and threw my house on the market. Now I live an hour away.
Yeah.
So it's not new, but it does get revamped every 4 years or so, where people suddenly start coming after cops and they start deciding that cops are the bad guys. But we can look through history and see this all the time. Any dictator that seized power usually did it by scapegoating a minority within that community, right? They take a group of people and say, these are your bad guys now.
Yeah.
And they'll find examples of that, and they'll find sometimes righteous examples. George Floyd's death was terrible, and I didn't know a single cop who didn't watch that video and think, yeah, those cops need to be held accountable, but we still had to deal with the protests and the rioting. Okay.
Sure.
Not just outside of that police agency. We were dealing with it in California. We were dealing with it everywhere. Because now every cop suddenly became a bad guy instead of just the ones that need to be held accountable. And that was hard. That was hard to deal with. That was hard to watch people call me every racial slur I'm part of that mobile field force team too. So I have to deal with riot control and riot response and crowd control stuff. And so I would get called out and we'd have to go and we'd sit there on a line and people would march up and down the line. They would call us. They would, I watched one guy, they launched fireworks. And these fireworks would go up and they'd bang, and then another one would go up and bang. And a guy walked down this line with a cell phone in his hand, acting like it was a gun. And every time you heard a bang from a firework, he'd pretend he just executed another cop.
Wow.
And then they would go along and they would find, especially the minority cops, they'd find the black cops that are on the line, and they would start yelling at them, telling them they're on the wrong side, yelling racial slurs and everything else, calling them every name under the sun, and just singling these guys out because of their skin color. And it was mentally hard to do, but I could turn that off, right? You go to work, you deal with that, you're like, yeah, whatever, you move on with your life. And then you get home, you turn on Facebook and realize, wow, this kid I went to high school with hates me now too. And This person here just totally blocked me. And, I had a friend of a friend who unfriended me because I was saying pro-cop stuff. And I was like, well, I am a cop, right. I'm not going to say anti-cop stuff. And that's the thing. Good cops hate bad cops more than ever, but we like to look at the individual and say, okay, hold that cop accountable. That cop needs to go see prison time. That cop needs to be sued by that victim. That cop needs to go deal and be held accountable for his actions.
Sure.
But not all 750,000 cops in the United States.
No, I agree with that 100%. And I think the thing that's been, I don't know if the word interesting is correct, but when we've seen there's riotous situations over the last few years, whatever is the story that creates the aftermath rioting, it never ends up being the full story. And
no, we saw that with Breonna Taylor.
yep. Well, we've seen it
Yep.
with, oh my goodness, you could go back the last 5 or 6 different, big issues with the police, whether it was George Floyd or going back and going back. Well, the media gets a hold of those sound bites, but then the whole story doesn't even come out, for a bit. And then it turns out that the narrative is almost the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, this started with Michael Brown. Michael Brown,
Yeah,
hands
Michael
up,
Brown.
don't shoot. Hands up, don't shoot never happened. And they proved in court that it never happened.
Yeah, or that officer would be in jail right now. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, and he would be rightfully in jail. I wouldn't even defend him.
Right.
Right. And so I get that. And that's the thing. It's a huge mistake that police agencies make. And one example would have been, I think it was down in Stockton, California. Years ago, they had this bank robbery. And this bank robbery was just like a Hollywood bank robbery. These guys had an AK-47. They had a hostage. There was like 3 of them in a car with a hostage. And there was a 60-mile long crime scene because these guys are running up and down the freeway being chased, shooting at cops. Cops are shooting back. It was crazy. It was the worst case scenario you can imagine. And in the end, the car finally got disabled. The guys came out blazing, shooting. The cops all fired back. They formed like a horseshoe around this car. They all fired back, and that hostage ended up being killed. What they did right was they did not deny that they messed up. Okay, what they did was they came out and they basically controlled the narrative by being completely honest and frank and releasing stuff. And the chief would come out and say, "This is not our finest day. We made a mistake."
Yeah.
Because cops were defending their lives and a hostage got killed. An innocent person was caught in the middle of all this. And so they investigated it. They opened it up. They did not deny it. They did not cover anything up. And I think that was a huge mistake that was done with a lot of these cases is agencies during their investigation will withhold information from the public that really does not need to be withheld in that time.
Right.
We can see this with the Las Vegas shooter. The
Yep.
Las Vegas shooter, there's so many conspiracy theories about this, and there's so much stuff, and everyone has all these different ideas of what his motive was and everything else. But the truth is because those agencies were not controlling the narrative. They weren't just being honest and blunt, and this is what we know and this is what we have. And as a result, people fill in the blanks and they start coming up with their own stuff and they start demonizing the wrong people, and it just makes everything way worse.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I can remember as a kid, I mean, I was born in 65. My dad was on the patrol. I think he started in 1960. And they didn't start wearing armored vests and, Kevlar back in the day then till about 1971 or 72, when some of the uprisings were happening with the American Indian movement. So the AIM stuff. And those guys, Russell Means, all these guys were run around, they were going to kill cops and stuff. So, my dad goes out, makes an investment in armor. And basically, I used to remember every day seeing him leave with that square, funny back, from his bulletproof vest. And not to be morbid or make it about me or anything, but my dad would always tell us that, unfortunately, in my job, there's a chance I may not come home today. So he would be working with myself, my siblings, trying to tell us that, you may have a day when I may not come home, and that might be the last time. So you need to be a big boy, you need to be big there. And it was just something that was drilled in my head because, there are very few jobs in the civilian side of the world, unless you're in the military, that, dad doesn't go to work today and doesn't come home because, somebody shot him. And so I don't think everybody who understands, who hasn't been on that side, the family side of law enforcement, really understands what that's like,
Yeah,
it's crazy.
and you don't. Yeah, you never know. Like highway patrolmen have a very dangerous job because it's not just about being shot, but it's about getting ran over. Somebody getting hit and killed, and that happens out here in California. It happens all the time. It's a large state, and so they have a large agency. So I don't want to make it sound like it's these guys are dropping like flies, but it does. It happens pretty often,
all the time.
And you never really know. I mean, I could be driving to work thinking that my job right now is relatively safe because, again, I usually show up after the fact now. But who knows? Who knows what I might come across or come upon on my way there, and who knows what might happen. And it's true. You really don't know when your time's coming, and you just try your best to to try and basically make sure your conscience is clear before you leave the house.
Well, and with your family too, you can't leave any issues on the table because you may take them with you.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny that you mentioned about being run over. That was almost the thing that happened to my dad that almost ended his career. He had pulled a speeder over. It was no winter. It wasn't some crazy snowstorm or anything. Now this was back in the days where they stood in between the cars, and where this story's going. And he was standing in between the car, and it happened to be a guy that we ended up knowing him. It was the father of one of my sister's friends. They were standing in between the cars talking about what was going on with the ticket. My dad looked up at the very last second, and a drunk driver had fixated on the lights and slammed into the back of the patrol car. And my father pushed the other guy, Mr. Grosso, out of the way and was pinned in between the two cars. And he was one of the first Flight for Life air transports in Denver. And we darn near lost him. He coded on the table 3 times. And there wasn't a shot fired. There wasn't a shot fired. And it took him over 2 years to get back so where he could get back on patrol, all those surgeries and rehabilitation, that kind of stuff. And it actually was the contributing factor for his early retirement because he just got into place and he couldn't do any further. And the other element for the highway patrol that's a little scarce that people understand is they're often out in the middle of nowhere with nobody around. They can be 75, 100 miles from the next unit to get to them. So it's kind of a scary thing. But no, I certainly understand. And I know as a father, I'm a podcaster. I'm in software. I leave the house, I might get involved in an auto accident, but no one's going to shoot me. So at least I hope not. So I know it's an added level of stress for those who live on that side of the badge and their families.
Yeah. And it's funny hearing your story about your dad. I mean, those are the stories that we were taught in the academy because I had a very similar incident happen to me, but it's because of those stories where they say, okay, when you approach a car, be on the shoulder side, be on the right-hand side, approach from the passenger side to kind of put those barriers of your vehicle and their vehicle between you and the traffic. And I had a drunk driver crash in my patrol car one night too. And I had just cleared a traffic stop. I just let somebody go. I was walking back to my car, but I didn't cross in between the cars. I didn't cross in front of my car. I walked around the passenger side, around the back, and I was just about to step into the street to approach the driver's side when I saw this truck coming. And so I stepped back out of the street. He ended up sideswiping my whole car. If I had made it to my driver's seat or driver's door, I would not have been able to get out of the way in time. No, and he ended up sideswiping my whole, he sideswiped my whole car and everything. And then he stopped, or I was able to jump in my car. I was able to get the door open and jump in my car, pull him over. And he told me, well, I was trying to get out of the way of another car. But luckily I had that dash cam that pretty much showed there was no other car approaching. And he was just drunk. And it was tough. I mean, again, not to get into politics, but that guy was actually just arrested 2 or 3 days before for DUI, and he was already out drinking again. And imagine if he did kill me, then we'd have to look at our justice system and be like, wow, the failure here led to the death of a police officer.
Yeah. Well, it's a very complex profession. I know a lot of people have respect for it, but a lot of people don't get that inside vision to what that's like. One of the things that used to just tear our family apart from a time perspective is back in the day, if there had been a fatal accident, even within a couple hours at the end of his shift, they would go and there'd be an investigation. The same trooper that covered it would have to do all the investigation. And especially if there's a fatal, then you got to remap everything and all drawings and photos and all that stuff. He might be gone another 6 hours doing investigation work on that particular accident, especially if they had some of these big truck rollovers and crashes and stuff like that. So his normal shift would turn into a day and a half. We wouldn't see him. And then he'd be so tired. Crazy.
Mm-hmm. And the thing about that is you never see it coming. So it's not like I could, call my wife and say, hey, I'm getting off late. If I'm getting off at 7 o'clock in the morning, it's 6:57 when I find out that I have to stay for another 4 hours.
Yeah.
Or finish up a report or do something like that. Like it, you don't see that coming. And that's hard on the family. There's a reason why there's a lot of respect for law enforcement wives, because they do often eat by themselves. They do often feel like a single parent. They do often have to put up with that stuff. And it's always last minute. It's not like you see it coming. It's just something you kind of sign up for when you just decide to support your spouse who works in any type of law enforcement or military.
Yeah, my father paid the price with my siblings and I because he was very frequent. I wouldn't say always, but more frequent than not able to get to sports games or awards banquets or whatever, just because he was working and, he just couldn't stop. It's not like he could put an accident investigation on hold and, come to a sports
Hmm.
banquet or go to a game or something. And so, um, like I said, I got nothing but respect for all the time and energy and service he put in. And when it was his last days, I thanked him up and down for that. But that was one thing that I was blessed in my career that, man, I made it to every single thing I could possibly do for my kids. I've got 5. And if any other failure I have as a parent, I know that at least I made it those games, but I didn't hold it against my dad because I knew it was just part of the job. It was just part of his career.
Yeah, there's a great article out there. It's called You Cannot Pour from an Empty Cup.
Hmm.
And that's a play on words, right? Obviously you can't pour from an empty cup. But it's a great article for everybody, not just police officers, where a guy kind of lays out and articulates, not just kind of describes kind of trauma or things you can experience at work, but he lays out what you do to get over it. And one of the things was respect your Sabbath, right? So your Sabbath is whatever day off you have, but
Yep.
once a week, take one day and say, okay, that's your day. That's your day to get errands done. That's your day to lay around the house and be lazy, binge watch a show, whatever it is. That's your day. Give yourself one day a week where you're not working, not doing the overtime, do something. And then he also lays out connecting with nature. But there's another book. It's a great article. If you could ever look up the article, or your listeners, I always recommend it. It's a short read, but it's great to lay it out. The other book out there I'd recommend is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F.
Yeah.
Great book, and they actually talk about this issue with kids. They're like, if you feel guilty for not spending time with your kids, then why aren't you just spending time with your kids? Lay out, look at your life and figure out what it is that's taking time away. And police work, you don't always have that luxury. But a lot of times, the example it gives in the book would be the mom who's trying to make homemade cupcakes. So she has to go out to the store. She has to get all the ingredients from scratch. She has to make all these things because she doesn't want to be judged for buying the store-bought stuff. And then she feels guilty for not spending more time with her kids. It's like, well, who cares? Just knock it off with all that nonsense. Stop with the PTA meeting. Stop with all that stuff and just set that time aside. Because you talk to anybody who's older and stuff, and they'll tell you that sometimes they do wish they worked less and focused more on their kids or went fishing more often or whatever. It's usually one of the bigger regrets that they have when they're on their dying bed.
Yeah.
And so to take that time, whether you're a police officer or military, doesn't matter. Everyone should be taking those moments to say, okay, what am I doing today that's going to make me happy? That's going to help me get a project done or help me, help me get rid of some guilt. Like I said, spend time with your kids. So, because I feel the same way. There's plenty of times where I wish I was there for my kid's basketball game or there for even a simple procedure, dentist, say getting a shot or something like that. When you hear about your kid crying and wishing that daddy was there, that's hard to hear.
Yeah.
And I hope someday they understand, like you understand with your father, he had a job to do. And in law enforcement, taking a day off means somebody else has to take your place, right? It's a
That's right.
24-hour agency. There always has to be some sort of backfill, which is why sometimes we just work a lot because there's just nobody else there. If not me, then who?
Yeah. So it's my understanding that in addition to your life of service and serving the community, that you've also stepped up and are a foster parent.
Yeah, that's kind of a different branch of my life well, it's definitely interesting. So I was a school resource officer for about a little over a year, and I had a lot of fun working with kids.
Yeah.
It was so much fun giving the stickers, working with children. I had a set of twin girls myself, and my wife and we had moved up to this new town after the incident, and we were struggling to have kids, and we thought, you know what, my parents were foster parents and stuff. I'm like, let's do that. Let's foster with the intention of wanting to adopt. And so we ended up having some great kids come through our house, and some were reunified with parents, and some just never left. And so we actually have 6 children now.
Wow.
2 are ours. 2 we have adopted. 1 we just have full guardianship of, and we have 1 that's actually just in the system. But he's thriving. He's doing great. And it's interesting. The foster system can be really great for some kids. Because it's only going up, right? They're sometimes pulled from the worst houses ever, and
Sure.
I've been a part of that too. I've been that cop who's had to show up and say, "No, little Johnny, you're coming with me this time."
Yep.
One of the worst stories I have about that is I was actually just a rookie cop, and it started off as a death investigation. A lady who was just severely disabled had died in this back room of this house. But as we're walking through the house, it occurs to us that there is no power, there is no running water. There's a big 5-gallon bucket sitting in an open shower in the kitchen. That's where people would take their showers and bathe themselves. And then we'd go back to look at this dead body, who was just a severely disabled woman, but she was probably too young to die, even being severely disabled. And we found jugs of just urine stacked in the closet, all around and it was just terrible. And there was, I think, 5 kids living in this house.
Oh my goodness.
And so I remember my partner took up I wrote the case about the dead body, and did all that information. My partner ended up doing an APS case, right? Adult Protective Services, because they're like, we don't know if this is if this person was just being mistreated or not. And so they investigated that side. And then my other partner ended up taking a CPS case and having all the kids detained. And I remember this 15-year-old girl who was old enough to understand what was going on just started arguing with him and yelling at him and getting in his face. And he told her, he's like, look, you don't understand now, but this is not the way you're supposed to live. You're going to go to a house that has running water and electricity and hot showers and all this stuff. And I understand it's upsetting for you, but right now, this is not the way it's supposed to be. And that always resonated with me, just the way he communicated with her and got her to calm down and basically gave her a promise that you're going to like where you're going. It's going to be better than this.
Yeah. She doesn't even know what normal is, does she?
Exactly. She had no clue.
Yeah.
And so when kids come to our house, my wife gets emotionally attached to every kid. And if a kid's not working out, she feels like it's her failure on some part. But not everyone's going to be perfect for every kid.
Right.
Some kids need more attention. Some kids need more love. Some kids thrive in an environment with lots of other kids around because they just enjoy it because they never had it before.
Right.
So but it's fun, it's fascinating, it's a challenge, and I love watching kids progress. Okay, when we have kids who would come through and just they're struggling, they're shy, and now they're outgoing, they're getting good grades, they're having fun, and just to see that genuine happiness and that change when it kind of starts to click and they start to feel comfortable in your home.
So how many kids have you worked with as foster parents?
Oh, wow. We've had, think about all of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, probably we've been doing this for about 2.5 years now. And I think we've had probably 12 kids come through our home.
Wow. I didn't realize that's pretty short tenures then.
Yeah. Well, some were just easier to deal with than others.
Okay.
And I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Foster care can be hard, and people always have worst case scenarios and stuff. But I say we've been really blessed and lucky with some of the kids we've had. But personality goes a long way, right? If you have the old feeble lady who's just getting taken advantage of by teenagers, that's you're not gonna have a kid that thrives as well as a kid like in my house where I am younger, I am used to dealing with people, I can be stern when I need to be stern. And I could be understanding and stuff because I deal with it as a cop all the time,
Right.
And sometimes I do communicate with these kids as like, hey, look, I know what you're going through because I've investigated it 3,000 times myself.
Yeah.
And I understand this and I understand the environment you came from, and so it's just the personality goes a long way. I wouldn't recommend it to everybody, but if someone in the audience is ever looking into adoption can be very expensive.
Yes.
But if you go through the foster program, it's really no cost to you. You get to help out these kids, and you almost get like a probationary phase with them where they come to your home and you kind of get to see, okay, is this kid going to work out? Do they fit in? Are they just like one of the family? Or are they just kind of odd and they don't really want to participate, or they're a recluse of some sort, and so you kind of get a probationary period where you get these kids in your home and you learn to love them, they learn to love you, and you get to spend some time with them and have a lot of fun with them. And like my one son who is still in the foster system now, I had a hard time getting him motivated to do anything. And at the end of last year, we started building a computer, and he built his first computer for gaming and stuff. And I'm not necessarily a big video game fan, but it was something that he was motivated to do. And I didn't know anything about it, but I learned so I could help him, and that's what you do. And I have a daughter, teenager, and she's really into makeup and making herself look good and stuff. And so I got her a special mirror for her bedroom with the lights and got her a makeup stand and sets because I knew that's what she liked. And again, I don't really appreciate that kind of stuff, but it motivates her and it gets her excited, and she's never had it before.
Wow. So, wow, that's what a rewarding experience. I know it's hard because bringing outsiders into your home, regardless of age, their backgrounds, and a lot of these kids have been through all kinds of things and no one would even want to imagine half of it. But that's that's a lot of work, but I'm guessing it's a lot of reward at the same time.
Yeah, it's great. Like, speaking of my teenage daughter, there's actually been a couple times where she's actually come late at night, knocked on our door. Hey, can I come in? Yeah, sure. She'd come sit at the foot of her bed and basically just tell us how much she appreciates us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and she had a strong relationship with her mom. And so to have her just kind of break down and say, you know, I just appreciate you guys. I appreciate you guys for what you do, and, you know, the stuff we do. And it was funny, just speaking of how they come from, she admitted when she came to our house after about 6 months, she said, you guys are rich. And I said, what do you mean we're rich? You know, she's like, well, you're rich because we didn't have any type of social service or EBT cards or food
Sure.
stamps or anything like that.
Sure.
And so she assumed that people that didn't require any of that kind of stuff were automatically rich.
Yeah.
And so there is some balance there, and you have to educate without making them feel bad, or you don't want to make them feel dumb.
Yeah.
But to kind of explain, it's like, well, no, this is what I do, and this is the goals I had in life, and this is where it took me. And, you know, kind of explain at the same time, trying to motivate her to say, hey, you know, when you're done with high school, we can look at colleges, we can do that. I'll help you pay for this and that. I'm not going to be like any other foster parent that might, you know, as soon as you're 18, you're out of the house. You know, you're my kid now, you know, and I'm going to support you as an adult as well as a young adult and help you kind of go out into this world and really try and build something for yourself.
Well, that's great. So I understand you're up to something interesting. You've launched a podcast. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I launched a podcast with a bit of a police theme. I call it Disturbing the Peace.
Okay.
I have a friend who lives around the corner from me who's a correctional officer. And so him and I just banter back and forth. And we usually talk about news of the day. We do launch into politics and stuff like that. And we don't always agree. It's pretty funny. But I do consider it a more conservative podcast, a more conservative commentary kind of show. But yeah, we have a lot of fun. We make fun of Florida a lot for some reason. I don't know why, but Florida just seems to be the blunt of our jokes. You know, but it's easy, right? You get on Google and, you know, search for Florida man and hit the news icon, and there's all sorts of great stuff that pops up. So, but yeah, it's a great podcast. We have a lot of fun with it. We release about once a week. If anybody wants to reach out to me and ask me any questions about police work or anything like that, they can get a hold of me at dtp@usa.com. That's David Tom Paul, dtp@usa.com. I'm the only one that answers that email. So that's basically like talking to me directly. But if they want to look up the podcast, it's Disturbing the Peace with Josh and Brent. It's pretty much on every platform. We use Anchor to distribute all our to all the different platforms and stuff. But yeah, it's great. We have a lot of fun. We bring on some special guests. The last episode, I had some guys that they're actually fighting the system with all the lockdowns and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
He owns a couple barber shops, and so they're fighting the system. His brother's running for office, and we had a great conversation with them about the struggles that they've been dealing with as a small business, and the ups and downs, and shutting down and opening up, and the things they've been going through. And so yeah, that's what we try and do. We do. We'll bring on a special guest every once in a while, or we'll talk about news of the day, especially any issues that come up with police officers and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a podcast I follow. It's an attorney out of Denver called Scott Reich, and he calls it Crime Talk, and he has Dumb Criminal of the Day. So part of his, and then they all compete for Dumb Criminal of the Week. So they try to find and he has people through, and it's a great way to have people engage because he publishes that out on YouTube, and then so people comment and they vote for the Dumb Criminal of the Week. And so he has some stupid story, you know, somebody doing the dumbest things in the world. I mean, as you know, you live the life of being around people who aren't the brightest sometimes, make the dumbest decisions. And so,
oh yeah, I mean, I got a story for you. If we have a few minutes, one of my first fight as a cop, and this is kind of like the golden moment for a cop, right? You get that rookie, he's out there, you know, he's in training, whatever it is. But when the first fight happens and he actually steps up or doesn't, right? He's either going to freeze or he's going to step up.
Right.
And so the first fight for cops are usually that story that most cops can kind of recall and be like, oh yeah, you know, I remember that time, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So my first fight, I'm working for a deputy sheriff. I'm a deputy sheriff, right? So one of the issues we have to take care of the jail. And sometimes somebody in jail needs to go to the hospital. So we call it a hospital detail. And so I'm a young guy on patrol, and I have to take this young woman to the hospital because she actually was arrested while pregnant, and now it's time for her to have her baby.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not excited about this, but I go and I bring her up to the third floor of this hospital. The windows don't open. You know, there's only one way in and out of the room. And I say, hey, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to give you all the privacy you need, right? Because the goal is just to have your baby and have your baby safely, right? She's like, yeah. And so doors open. I say, I'm going to sit right outside, but I'm going to close the curtain. So you still have your privacy and stuff. Be polite to all the nurses and stuff. So, anyways, she starts arguing with the nurses and she starts being a little lippy with them. And then finally, I start losing my patience. So I tell her, I was like, "Hey, you're still in custody. I need you to be polite. I need you to do this." And she jumped up out of bed, completely naked, and she said, "What are you going to do? Shoot me?" And she grabs a heart monitor machine, throws it at me.
Oh my goodness.
But all the wires are still attached. So it only flies about halfway through between us and it stops suddenly and falls to the ground. So now the fight's on. So now I'm fighting. My first fight as a cop, I'm fighting with a naked pregnant lady.
Oh no.
And so I was able to put her in an armbar, guide her down to the floor because I'm not trying to hurt her. I just try to control her.
Right.
Get her down to the floor and I'm pinning her down. I got on the radio, asked for cover. A neighbor agency shows up and these guys run in. They throw the curtain aside and they see me basically pinned down on top of this naked pregnant lady. They just stop. Like nobody helps me. They just back out of the room like, whoa. And my partner shows up and he helps me get her up. But as I'm pinned down waiting for the cops to show up, the doctor comes over and she says, "Hey, by the way, it's not a bad thing that your water broke." And I was like, "What?" And I looked down and realized my whole right leg is soaked with the amniotic fluid.
Oh my goodness.
Her water broke and just got all over me. And so I'm totally stressed out. We get her up, get her back in the bed. This time we actually handcuff her down. I didn't want to handcuff her before because she's having a baby, right? So
Sure.
now she has to be handcuffed down. I leave and my sergeant shows up and he's like, "What happened?" And I kind of look down. He's a tall guy. So I'm looking down. I'm telling him the story. And I look up and he's just laughing. Like he's barely containing himself that his poor little rookie cop is now has to go back to the office and change his pants and write a report.
Yep.
So I go back to the office and I go into dispatch to pull case number and they want to know what happened. So I tell them, they all start laughing at me. I go, I write my report, change my clothes. The day's over. I have to leave for the morning. And I'm walking by the briefing room and the day shift sergeants and they're telling everybody the story and they're all laughing at me. And it was just, and yeah. And so what was funny though, is it actually, since I got past that rite of passage that I'm willing to fight people, even a naked pregnant lady, I ended up with a lot of overtime opportunities. Those sergeants were like, "Oh yeah, this is really funny, but hey, that guy will fight people. Let's get him on our shift."
Yeah.
And then to make it all worse, it turns out that lady, she was a paranoid schizophrenic, which I was not informed of. She had a lot of issues going on. She was always in and out of jail. And about 10 months later, I got dispatched to another hospital detail with another pregnant woman. And I walk into the jail to go get her and everyone's starting to laugh at me. I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm that guy, whatever. And I go up to her cell and the cell opens. It's the same lady.
Same lady.
She's pregnant again, about to have another kid. And my boss thought it'd be really funny to send me back to the hospital with her again.
Oh, no. That's
So
crazy.
yeah, I mean, and so that's my first fight story. That was just, and everyone laughs when I tell that story. It was basically very traumatic for me at the time, but now it's funny. But yeah, not everyone can say that they fought a naked pregnant lady and had her water break all over your leg.
No, I think that's probably a once in a lifetime story. I don't think there's a lot of people who share that one. That's for sure.
I hope it's a once in a lifetime story.
Well, and my family, we have some mental illness. Some members of the family have mental illness, and when you are around anything of the police and the corrections and all that good stuff, there's so many people out there that are mentally ill. I mean, I think the numbers are something like 74% of women that are in prison and 63 or something of men have mental illness issues, severe mental illness issues. And so the thing that I always think about, just because we have experience with some of that, is I just feel for police officers when they head into any situations, because you're not only just dealing with people who are upset, but you're dealing with people, in a lot of cases, a majority, that aren't in their right mind in the first place. Then you add in all the other, adrenaline and anger and fear and stuff. And man, that's a mixed cocktail soup that most people don't want anything to do with.
Oh no, I mean, we could do a whole podcast on stories about this kind of stuff, but no, I've come across it a lot. And being patient is one thing. Understand that the hard thing to teach a new cop or any cop coming through is teaching him to recognize it right away. Yeah. This guy's not just acting violently. No, he's suffering from something. Something's going on. Let's talk to him differently. Let's see what works and what doesn't. And sometimes that means just walking away. If you got a guy who's suffering an event and he's at home by himself and there's nobody else around and he's not harming anybody else, sometimes all you could do is just say, "Hey man, okay, well, I'm not going to get hurt going after you. I'm not going to create an exigency. I'm not going to create a circumstance in which I have to shoot you. because you grab a weapon or something, I'm just going to walk away.
Yeah.
And here's a pamphlet. Here's some services that you can call if you need help. I can take you to the hospital right now, but if you don't want that, okay. Because that's all we can do. And that's all, when it comes back to this whole defunding the police thing, just like a school, right? If you defund a school, the first things that are going to lose are your music programs and your art programs, right? If you defund the police, the first things you lose are your homeless outreach programs, your mental health outreach programs, your school resource officers. The people that actually really do some good in your communities are the first programs to get cut when you defund the police. They'll cut those programs real fast, and then they'll be like, oh crap, now we need to maybe lay off officers or something like that. And that's really not what we want. That's not what you bargained for.
Right.
Okay. You really need those programs. You really need someone who's dedicated to just, okay, we're just going to do homeless outreach. We're not going to catch criminal crimes on these people, but we need to find some services for them. And I've actually been part of what they call homeless sweeps. And it's hard because we contacted probably 120 people in a day, and we brought social workers with us. We had neighboring agencies come help us. So it was just a good mix of people, a cooperative effort. And maybe only 10 or 12 people actually accepted services.
Wow.
And these are services to get housing and drug addiction services and that kind of stuff out of 120 people. And that's hard. It's hard to look at somebody and know that they need help and know, or at least feel like what's best for them, and for them to say, no, I like my lifestyle.
Yeah. Well, I think the issue that most people are not cognizant of and not paying attention, it's so easy to get wrapped up in these quote causes of let's defund this or that or change behavior. But the biggest underlying mess is we just have a huge mental health issue problem. And I'm not defending people for being stupid. That's just an accelerator. And we really, as a society and as a world, we don't really have our arms around that, because it's not something that, the average layperson can just diagnose. And so, it's crazy. I just think the whole thing, and people don't stop and think about that. If people were really thinking about the fact that probably 3/4 of the people that are involved in criminal justice situations have mental health issues, it would be a whole different conversation about defunding the police. So I get on a soapbox on that. Oh my goodness.
No, I understand. That's one thing I learned really quick in police work is, if solving homelessness is really about just providing homes for people, we could have solved it decades ago.
Yeah.
It really is. It's a mental health and a drug abuse issue. And a lot of times that goes hand in hand.
Yep.
And so, it's a tough problem to solve, because I don't want the justice system to be just a revolving door for people who can't get out of the cycle.
Yep.
But we don't always have the resources available to us to really get these people real help. And on top of that, I can't kidnap them. They have to want the help.
Exactly.
And that's the part that people don't understand. We can't just build facilities and say, well, if we build it, they will come. They won't come. So if we don't have some reason to bring them there or force them there, which would usually be a criminal charge, we can't just, like I said, I can't just kidnap people off the street and say, nope, this is where you're going because I don't like the way you live right now.
Yeah, that ain't gonna happen.
No, it's not. And you'd be violating their constitutional rights.
Yeah. Brent, you've been great to talk to today. Great to hear your story. And I'm sure that there's millions of police officers out there that have similar stories just like yours. But I think one that makes your situation a little interesting is not only have you come from a background of service, which is common, but you are, in addition to being a law enforcement officer, being a foster parent, that's also cool. And now you're out there doing a great thing by sharing your stories and your experiences being a podcaster. So thanks for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was great. I enjoyed it.
Now, please, for one more time, so people know how to follow your podcast and get a hold of you. So could you share that again?
Yes. So the email is DTP. That's David Tom Paul, DTP@USA.com. Again, that goes directly to me. And the podcast is called Disturbing the Peace with Josh and Brent. There's actually a big picture of my face on there, and Josh, and my wife is pulling my ear. I'm actually looking for some new cover art at the moment, but it's a great podcast. We have a lot of fun. We don't always put it out. I'm not making any money from it or anything. We just, like I said, I do it because it's probably therapy for me. Like I like to just talk, and get things off my chest, especially my frustrations with anything going on in the news.
Well, that's for sure. We'll keep at it. I'll cheer you on, and I'll definitely listen in. All right. Well, thanks for coming on, and thanks everybody for tuning in and listening. This is another episode of the Rex Andrews Show. Don't forget to look for us wherever you get your podcast, and also always at the rexandrewshow.com. Just have one thing to say as we part today. Be safe, be bold, and make it a great day.